Hello and welcome everybody to the Safe Climate Youth Summit with SilverLining and YOUNGO. My name is Madeline Carlsberg-Schaefer, but please call me Maddie. I'm one of the co-hosts and moderators for today. I'm a research fellow with SilverLining, originally from Scotland, but living in the Netherlands. It's brilliant to be here. There's been a big build up to today, so I'm really excited for the rest of the summit. Just a reminder, please do ask questions as much as possible. There will be a lot of opportunities for interaction in Q&As, so please use that chat function. But first, I will hand over to my wonderful co-hosts, Josh and Ponsem, for a warm-up exercise.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again. It's very exciting to have you here, and we look forward to a very exciting event. To get us warming up, to listen to our speakers, we have a very simple and fun exercise for you to do. And for this, you need a mobile phone, so please get your mobile phones up. And for those who are familiar with Mentimeter, it's a very fun interactive element for virtual meetings. So we're gonna have Mentimeter, and you have to go to menti.com. There will be a code for you to put in, which is 53281980. And once you get to this page, the main question is, what comes to your mind when you hear the phrase solar climate intervention? So we know that not everyone is familiar with it, so we're really keen to hear what really pops to your mind when you hear this phrase, solar climate intervention. So get to menti.com, put in the code, and let's hear from you so that we can just collect sort of your first thought when you hear the phrase solar climate intervention. And to help all of us, I'm going to put the code in the chat, which is 53281980. And you have to go to menti.com, which I'm also putting in the chat now, and you should be able to answer the questions. So we're going to see the answers live. So please do go and put in your thoughts when you hear this phrase. By the end of today's session, we're hoping that we will all be on a similar page when we hear this phrase. And our views are not too divergent from what it actually means when the phrase solar climate intervention comes up. So let's see how many people have been able to navigate themselves to the platform. Awesome. So the answers are coming through. So technology, that is great. Artificial manipulation, awesome. False solutions, sunlight, great. So there's a couple of these artificial man-made sort of man-induced manipulation coming in, false solutions coming in as well. And I mean, this is very important for young people because as much as we want the climate crisis to be fixed, we really don't like it when people sell us false solutions to make us believe that they are actually taking action. So really great. I think we can get a couple more coming in. So sunlight, mitigating climate change effect, buys us time. Okay, so also very positive one. So it seems the answers are going different ways. You have from manipulation to buying us time to false solutions to technology. That is all great. So this is the reason why we want to have this conversation today, right? We want to be able to understand what it means when we talk about solar climate intervention, but also to get a chance to hear from people who are working in the field to share their experiences with us. And through different sessions, we would unpack this. So thanks for engaging us in this sort of warm-up exercise. That is very important. And to kick us off, we have a panel that is going to start with our first session, which will focus on the near-term climate risk. So to get this going, I'm going to go back to Maddie to kick us off. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Josh. So before we head to our panel, we actually have an informative video by Will Steffen from the Institute for Climate, Energy and Natural Disaster Solutions. And this will kind of contextualize the science of near-term climate threats that we are all facing now. So with that, the video.
Good day, my name is Will Steffen. I'm an Earth system scientist. I study how the Earth operates as a system, how our human activities are influencing the system, and the risks that lie ahead as we impact the system even more. The first slide here is based in my hometown, Canberra, Australia, and it was taken in January this year when massive bushfires were threatening the city. This was totally unprecedented. We're a continent that's used to fires, but we had never seen fires of the intensity and the scale that we have seen 6 months ago. And we know very well why the fires were so unprecedented, why we saw fires of the intensity that we did. And that's because of climate change. Now, the interesting thing is we could get to these higher temperatures not by human emissions alone, but by a phenomenon called tipping points. These are parts of the Earth's system that can change when they are forced past a certain point. So let's have a look at what these tipping points are and how they operate and why they could be so dangerous for us in the future. We know what they look like. They come in 3 basic types. They're big masses of ice, either floating on the surface like the Arctic sea ice, or on land like Greenland or West Antarctica. And of course, they can melt as the Earth warms. They're big ecosystems or biomes, the Amazon rainforest, the big northern forests in Canada and Siberia, and circulation systems like the Atlantic Ocean circulation or the jet stream in the atmosphere. We know a fair bit about these tipping points already, and we know the ranges of temperature at which they are at risk of tipping. And they're color-coded here. You see ones near the poles at the lower temperatures, then some between 3 and 5, and the East Antarctic ice sheet above 5. But how do they actually work? Well, let's look at one of them. This is ice floating on the Arctic Ocean. And what you see here is the difference in the reflectivity of the sunlight. The white ice reflects virtually all the sunlight coming in, but the darker ocean water absorbs it. And you see this feedback loop getting going. So this is the real danger as we start heating the planet, that these feedbacks get started. And once they get started, then they are at risk of reaching a point where you can take the pressure off, but the internal feedback keeps the system moving. For example, once you reduce Arctic sea ice to a certain level, the heating that it's generating itself will cause its eventual demise. So when we go back here, we can see that these are connected in ways that I've just mentioned. For example, the Arctic summer sea ice, as it melts, it causes heating in this region. That activates the Greenland ice sheet even more, causes more ice melt. That pours even more water onto the North Atlantic Ocean. That changes the ocean circulation, and that affects rainfall over Amazon. And we can go through these other feedback loops, but the point is these are linked and they can act like a row of dominoes, where when you push the first couple of dominoes over, you start tipping the ones behind it, and you get a whole cascade of dominoes tipping over. So the real concern here is that we could activate a tipping cascade if we let this system go on. So the question is, where might you activate such a cascade? The IPCC in its 1.5 report has estimated that there is a moderate risk already of large-scale singular events. These are these tipping events at a 1 degree temperature rise, which is where we're sitting today. But this is moving toward a high risk at 2.5 degrees of warming. And our present emission trajectories will take us at least to 3 and possibly more. So we're heading now for a very high risk of these tipping elements. Well, where do we sit at 1? Is the IPCC correct? Are we already at a risk of tipping them? Well, these are actual observations from the present time. And we can see indeed that several of these tipping elements are already moving towards their tipping points. Arctic sea ice is reducing in area. The Atlantic Ocean is slowing down. Ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica are losing mass. There are more droughts in the Amazon rainforest. So already in the year 2020, we can see that several of these tipping points are already activated, as we say, and they are moving in the direction of their tipping point. In our analysis, we made this very important quote: if damaging tipping cascades can occur and a global tipping point cannot be ruled out, then this is an existential threat to civilization. No amount of economic cost-benefit analysis is going to help us. We drew this little cartoon to try to describe the dynamics of where the Earth system is moving in this era of rapid heating and tipping points. So for several 100,000 years, the Earth oscillated between ice ages and warm periods. And the latest warm period is the era in which humans developed our civilizations that we know today. But already our greenhouse gas emissions have pushed us out of this system of ice ages and warm periods and into this very shallow, hotter valley, which is not a very stable zone in itself. So this Earth is already moving away from its stable state, and it's moving toward a fork in the road. Now, we've talked about one fork in the road, That's the dangerous one where we initiate this tipping cascade and we go over what we depict here as a planetary threshold or cliff, which takes us into the 4 or 5 degree area, hothouse Earth. But the other fork in the road is what we call stabilized Earth, and that's achieved through Earth system stewardship. But if we approach and get onto this trajectory, we could reach a point of no return where these feedback cascades take over, and they will take us, even if we get our emissions down, into hothouse Earth. One way we can analyze this danger is to look at what's called intervention time and reaction time. So here we have some emission reduction pathways from the IPCC. And what we describe as reaction time is the time it takes to actually hit net zero emissions. So when this line comes down to zero, it's depicted here as 2060. But let's be optimistic and say we can hit net zero 10 years before that at 2050, just as many governments and other jurisdictions now legislating for net zero by 2050. So that's the time it's going to take us to really get the system back under control. But then the intervention time is how much time we have left to actually stop or minimize the risk of these tipping points. And we can actually put some numbers there too. So the estimates are Arctic sea ice. Well, we're probably almost at the tipping point today. West Antarctic ice sheet, maybe a decade in the future, we'll be tipping that. Amazon forest, 15 years, although the latest research says that could be optimistic. Greenland ice sheet, maybe 25 years. So here we have 4 tipping points where the times we think we have left to stop them from tipping are shorter than the time we have to hit net zero emissions. So that's saying we already are in quite a dangerous situation, that we are at risk of starting a tipping cascade. So that raises the question, are we already losing control of the system? That's why it's so important over the next few years to take very strong and definitive action on climate change. The students have been saying this for a year or so now. They can intuitively feel that something is going awry with the planet that's going to be their future home for most of the rest of their lives. And so they are out on the streets striking more and more, saying this is an emergency. We've reached a point of no return where we really have to get on with fixing this system. So the analysis I've just showed you tells you that scientifically, the children are indeed right. We are facing a climate emergency. The next few years are absolutely critical. We have to come out of the coronavirus crisis, moving in the right direction, getting emissions down, and heading for net zero by even earlier than 2050. So thank you very much for your attention.
So now that we have the realities of the science laid out by Will, it's time to hear the realities young people are facing with. And with that, our first speaker is Ricardo Pineda. He is a youth climate leader from Honduras, named one of the world's 100 youth climate champions in 2019 by the UN. He is also the director and co-founder of Sustenta Honduras, a youth-led climate action NGO based in his home country. Hello, Ricardo. Thanks for being with us today.
Hello, thank you, Maddie, and I'm happy to be speaking about the reality of Honduras and what's causing climate change right in ground zero, which is what I call Honduras, right? So let me jump in to my message, and many people don't know this, but Honduras is regarded as the most climate vulnerable country in the world. This according to the Climate Vulnerability Index, which is a publication that is done every year to assess the vulnerabilities in case of extreme weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, and what the economic and human impact of these of these disasters could be in the country. So Honduras has been in the top 15 or at least in the top 3 countries for the last 15 years. The future looks gloomy to us, and I believe that the biggest message that I can give specifically and relating this to safe climate intervention is that last year, we were struck by 2 Category 5 hurricanes in a 10-day span. That means that in the 2-week span, we're already receiving our 2nd Category 5 hurricane. The economic contraction of the country was already at negative 6.7% of GDP due to the COVID pandemic. But when both hurricanes came, we ended up at negative 9.1 economic growth. So my message here is, how can a country grow sustainably out of poverty if we will be set back years of development, of economic development, because of climate change? And I don't want to speak only about extreme weather events, because these are not the only effects that we are enduring because of climate change. as I was saying, Honduras is the ground zero for sea level rise. And in this short video, you will see the community of Cedeño, Choluteca. And they are located in the southern coast of Honduras. And as you will be seeing right now, they have lost at least 5 blocks of houses, hotels, bars, restaurants due to sea level rise. Sea level rise is not something that will happen in the next 30 years. It's happening now, and it's absorbing entire cities at a 2-hour drive from my house. And the future is concerning, to say the least. Deforestation rates are soaring due to extensive cattle farming, and forest plagues are exacerbating climate change. We need support from the international community. The future of developing countries is at stake, and we are quickly getting locked up in a long-lasting poverty trap. Thank you.
That is impressive, and thanks a lot, Ricardo. Coming from Sub-Saharan Africa, and last year I did a research with young people in Mozambique and Madagascar, and I can attest that it is very, very difficult if you think around trying to make progress in life and fulfill your ambitions as a young person and your aspirations, but you keep getting knocked down every single year because of extreme weather events, but also pre-existing conditions, which makes these extreme weather events even much more harmful and impactful in communities. And this brings the urgency on why action needs to be taken now, but also from the earlier video, why I really like the statement scientifically, the children are right, the youth are right, we need action now. And I'm very honored to introduce our next speaker because she, at her age as a young activist, is already mobilizing and harnessing the power of small activities every day. And I'm very glad to introduce Angela Bushika, who is the founding CEO of Enroute in North Macedonia, 19-year-old with a dream to create a world of inspired youth who wants to make the world a better place. Angela, over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm really proud to be here today, but also to raise the awareness on a very important topic that is really concerned in my country. So everyone, this was Lake Prespa. So once a tri-point of North Macedonia, Greece, and Albania. Mind you, it was the highest tectonic plate in Southwest Europe, belonged to UNESCO's World Network of Biosphere Reserves. It was home to idyllic beaches, villages, and a large number of endemic species, all making it a favorite vacation spot for both Macedonians and so many external tourists around the globe. Now, you've noticed that I've spoken as the lake existed somewhere there in the past. But where is it now? Did it move? Did it pack its things and went away? Well, I guess you're right. As you can see on the video, it is shrinking and completely disappearing. Once the majestic place on earth, the queen of tranquility and peace, now it turns into land and mud. Now, many scientists and thousands of conducted research papers all brought up the same why behind these results. Rising temperatures, inaction from population, dry weather, or in other words, climate change and its devastating consequences on low-developed countries. Speaking about this situation on numerous events, once a member in the audience told me, at least it doesn't harm the citizens, right? I mean, people can live without the lake, as we do in many, many cities around the globe. But can they? You see, this lake was majestic and beautiful, but was not just an add-on on the city. It was not just a place for cute Instagram selfies and TikTok videos. The lake was the integral core part. People in numerous villages in the region have lost their jobs because since they know for themselves from the beginning of the core families, they've all worked in the tourism and fishery. But now, as you can see, everything is gone. The whole habitat has faced a huge disorder, and the majestic beaches, all that along with the clear lake water and tradition of bathing and relaxation, is all gone. Since the amenities are not present, you can understand, neither are the tourists. The same goes with the fish. You know, the famous ochre trout, Macedonian pine, and exceptional rare Balkan lynx can only be found dead in the mud. So no, even though the lake is not an existential need like oxygen, it harms both the mental and financial stability of the citizens. It's really a remark that wrong actions will only further an ecological catastrophe to a point it cannot be reverted. But we are fighting each day to make sure that Lake Prespa will not only be a good memory, but instead a base to a fascinating future. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much, SilverLining, for having me.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that talk. It really, I truly hope that Lake Prespa doesn't become a thing of the past and becomes a memory, and that people don't have to sit and watch one of their treasured places for leisure, for their means of livelihood disappear before their eyes. And so that is one of the realities. I'm sure it's not one of the only lakes around the world that is indeed disappearing due to rising temperatures. So thank you, Angela, for highlighting that to us. And with that, we have our next speaker, and that is Nishad Shafi. He is the Executive Director of the Arab Youth Climate Movement, which is spearheading youth climate action in the Middle East. Named by Apolitical in 2019 as one of the world's 100 most influential people in climate policy, he joins us here today from Qatar. Hi, Nishad.
Maddie, thank you for the introduction. We come from the most tropical region in the world. We are a desert ecosystem. And we might have heard that Middle East is one of the worst impacted by the climate change in the coming decades. Existing issues of water scarcity, heat waves, and sea level rises have been much highly studied. And it's going to be a space, which is what IPCC terms to be the inhabitable place in the next 30 years. That should send shockwaves in the region, but unfortunately, due to the political issues in the region, the issues of climate change has been always below the discussion of any political leader. Given the fact the recent development has been promising in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation from a very governmental political perspective, given the latest meeting hosted by the Special Envoy for the United States President, John Kerry's visit multiple times to the Middle East, North Africa countries, and hosting a couple of summits in the region, gives a hope that the discussion may be taken further in a place where it is narrowly discussed. In terms of impacts of climate change, the region's existing condition would be exacerbated with the current rise in temperature to 2 degrees Celsius. The results would be catastrophic for the individuals living in this part of the world. We're already suffering under the massive heat waves which comes over our summers, which are already touching 45 to 50 degrees Celsius in a normal summertime. Just imagine that going to be astronomically increased with the 2 degrees Celsius increase. That temperature would be making definitely the results of the studies are true. This would definitely make inhabitable that the level of temperature. It's not can be assumed by human or other biodiversity. It can even kill the human population. So given the fact water would be one of the scarce product in this region. We are known for oil and gas, but in the past we would be cherishing to find water in this part of the region, and that would also, with increased drought seasons, which would also make some of the very fertile lands in the Maghreb and Mashriq region in this part of the world to be, go out of, and that would also bring more issues to the existing political issues in this part of the world. Also, some of the countries which are indulged in civil war, this would only make those countries to be most devastated under the current changing climate, which are happening at a very faster rate. Over the next 10 years, this will be very critical how the leaders in the region take next reaction, not only locally at the country level, but also as a regional, because it's a regional powerhouses have been always quite working closely in terms of political narrative. I believe as a climate topic, if the governments in the region work in cooperation, there has been quite promising future for the region's young people. Yes, it's true that the young people from this region came late to the global climate conversation, but definitely comes with the backdrop of issues from the politics in the region. Definitely the issues of climate change has to be more forefront, the fact because the region would be the worst suffering in terms of climate issues in the coming days or years. We already have seen extreme heat, which has been so devastating. It has to stop the daily working times of people who are working during the daytime outside buildings. And also at the same time, the water scarcity is making more desalination units to come up in this part of the region. As also, you know, almost 60% or 70% of the world's desalination plants are in this part of the world, obviously for the reason that we have a huge crisis in water, and underground water level has been astronomically low even in the past. So given the fact the impact of climate change is huge in this region, if not tackled with the same importance as how the rest of the topics have been discussed in this part of the world, it would be meaning that the future of young people in this part of the world would be jeopardized. And that would be not only making the young people, but also the people of this generation and also the upcoming generation would feel the bond of what we would be doing. So obviously the action what our leaders would take now would definitely dictate how we will live in the next decade. Thank you, Maddie.
Thanks, Nishat, and really great to hear from you. We work very closely, so it's very great to hear your intervention at this very important meeting. And one thing you said, which I find very, very interesting, is the power of cooperation. We know we can do it, but we need to cooperate to be able to do it. And what does it take to cooperate? And we're going to try to unpack some of these things in the Q&A to get things a little bit more concrete to see what really needs to be done. And again, to reiterate, children are scientifically right. We want to tell the adults what to do, and we need to get concrete with that. So really, thanks a lot, Nishat. Now we've heard from different parts of the world, and the next person I'm going to introduce is not going to be with us here live in person, but very important for me to note is that we're going to hear from her story in Tonga Island in the Pacific. And this is very important because, as Nishat said, and as previous speakers said, every region feels the impact of climate change. It is very urgent, but more so in the Pacifics, this is very, very important. So our next speaker is Carlo Afique, who is the coordinator for 350 Pacific Climate Warriors in Wellington. And she focuses very much in geography and the Pacific studies, very important for the climate conversation at the University of Wellington. So I'm going to leave it up for us to hear from Carlo Afique. Thanks.
Malolele, kopinga ko Carlo Afique, ogolele mai miha ato hapai, to whaatanga tapu, ngati ka hangunu te wairoa, ailani mo Piritania. Malolele, everyone. I am Carlo, and I'm of Tongan, Māori, and European descent. I'm a part of the Pacific Climate Warriors, which is a network of climate activists from across 15 Pacific Island nations, with 6 teams also in the US, Australia, and Aotearoa. We are young people who are fighting for our islands against climate change, even though we are the smallest contributors to this issue. I grew up in the beautiful kingdom of Tonga. We are fondly called in my language, the Fo'ipiriote, or the period, as we are so small, we are but a dot on the world map. In Tonga, we say si'ipe kaiha, small but capable of great things, which is something I carry close to my heart as I work to combat the biggest threat to my country's survival, climate change. Climate change is an extreme challenge for the Pacific, one that is a lived reality for our people, and one that for me is very personal. Growing up in Tonga, I was surrounded by the beauty of my home, but also the devastation presented by a climate growing more unstable and creating more extreme weather events. In 2018, Gita, a Category 5 cyclone, decimated Tonga. I was safe in New Zealand, but was terrified for my family who live in Tonga, my parents, my brother, my nieces and nephews. Where the strong winds and rising sea levels wreak havoc around them. I am grateful that none of my family's lives were lost that night, but our livelihood, our export business, was severely impacted. The lack of decisive and bold action by fossil fuel dependent countries has meant that my family has had to crawl back on all fours from Cyclone Gita. We have had to make massive financial and emotional sacrifices that have impacted us all. For me, climate change is personal because lives and livelihoods are being destroyed, and countries like Tonga suffer due to the work of so-called developed nations. That is why I joined the Pacific Climate Warriors, as we recognize that there is a framing of Pacific Island nations as small, weak, waiting for help, unable to fight for themselves against climate change, when the reality is far from this. The Pacific is at the forefront of climate change impacts, but Pacific Island leaders and communities have also been at the forefront of climate solutions for decades. From Tokelau, being the first 100% solar-powered country, to young people from the Marshall Islands, who in 2015 kickstarted the 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign, a campaign supported by our elders and which eventually came to be part of the Paris Agreement. We need to be looking to the Pacific, to young people who carry their home island's Mannain hope. Look to them for the solutions that will carry us beyond this era of destruction into one of prosperity for all. The decisions we make today will impact us all, but the difference in our experiences that it will be those of us on the front lines, my small family business, the community back in Tonga, and all of us in the islands that will either reap the fruits of our decisions today or continue to pay the cost. What will it be? Leve leva malanga tuafatu.
This is heart-touching, and the question of what will it be, right? And I could listen to Carlo all day just to remind myself how important it is for us, all of us, to be activists every day, anytime, to really put decision makers on their toes to act. And to pick it up from where Carlo ended, sharing really practical and sort of making climate change personal to her in terms of the livelihoods being affected, the aspirations being knocked down, and the fear of the uncertain future because of the impact of climate change. And before I take any question from the audience and we get into that, I have one question to everyone of our panelists. How do you think your situations are going to evolve in the coming future? Looking at what we've heard so far, looking at the science itself, and if you look at your communities, which you're talking on behalf of, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years? And please, our dear panelists, please feel free to step in.
Okay, thank you so much. So yes, I can say that from this point of view, especially for Lake Prespa, as I've introduced, I can say that we still have a long path to go and uncertainties are all around us. So government and some organizations have planned activities that want to achieve two general goals, namely improving environmental conditions of ensuring better status of the water, soil, and biodiversity to protect human health and the entire ecosystem of Prespa Lake. And as a second goal, we have, I would say, sustainable and efficient use of water. But something that makes our situation even more complicated is that the lake is shared between two other neighboring countries. So each action we have to take requires joint coordination. So this is here where the bureaucracy and all the political things come in place together with saving human life and saving the habitat together. I'm afraid that time is running out faster than our actions, because when there is a special force that there will be stuck in the parliament of any of these three countries. So drying a lake due to climate change is not only an issue in North Macedonia, as Maddie said, and take place worldwide. And I can say that at this point, all we can come down is to use, in this time that we have left, use the natural resources in the right manner, and the plans and the analysis which we are performing today to make sure that they are marking our activities for tomorrow, and they are keeping accountable what will be happening tomorrow, and not only for today. That is all I have to say at this point.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'm going to turn quickly to Nishat. What are your thoughts?
I'm optimistic, and for the region as such, given the much of the Gulf region where we're part of, are very small countries as tiny as 2.5 million population. It would be incredible, like Joshua, you mentioned, the cooperation. It's a super sunny country, and utilizing those energy for the energy production would be key. For the Gulf countries, energy transition has been quite actively discussed topic, and even the new discussion around blue hydrogen and green hydrogen have been quite actively discussed in Saudi Arabia. The latest Middle East initiative by Saudi Arabia is quite commendable. I mean, the implementation and the cooperation between the Gulf countries, as you know, this region has a great history of conflict. So how does that build up in the coming days would be critical, as for not only for the government, young people like us is not always optimistic how our governments will be acting, but we at the same time looked at how energy transition, moving away from fossil fuel industries, at the same time keeping up the economic aspiration of the young people is also super important at the same time. So how these both things can be done at the same time would be super critical. And in terms of course, the region also are existing issues of water scarcity can be dealt with more technology, and how the technology transfer can take place, and how it can be distributed within the evenly countries and some of the poor countries within the same region. Because most of the time you've been heard of the Gulf countries as super rich countries, but we have countries like Yemen and Syria, Jordan are all suffering. So how do you work in partnership, get all those countries from the MENA Gulf countries together, use those enormous Soviet fund to help the regional countries? They all share a great idea as a large Arab nation, but how you work at the grassroots level would be critical. So I'm optimistic, but at the same time, pessimistic how our political leader will be acting in the coming days.
Great, thanks very much, Nishat. So from Angela's message on running out of time, we need to work now, to Nishat, your view on leveraging technology and cooperation and bringing the finance to grassroots activism and actual projects. I'm going to turn to Ricardo for him to settle the score for us. Ricardo, bring it back to Honduras and being the most vulnerable country by the World Race Index. What are your thoughts in the next few years?
I hate to be the deciding vote, but unfortunately, I'm not too optimistic on this matter, and I have to refer specifically to the video that we're seeing at the beginning. Of course, so we are looking at some targets for 2050. We are looking at some commitments from the big governments. However, there's still a big gap, and between this gap, there are big things in the way: the Amazon forest, the ice sheets in the Arctic, in the Antarctic. And unfortunately, there are many other things that perhaps were not mentioned, but the biodiversity crisis, the crisis on the forest, specifically on developing countries just like mine. I think that will we make the ultimate goal? I don't know how many goals we're missing already, right? So I think that we do need more urgent action. We do need more support from the international communities, and of course, as developing countries, we are the ones who have the most to lose, right? So unfortunately, and as a young person, I don't see that happening right now, even though I see a lot of progress, a lot of technologies, and this is our own future at stake, and we're not acting to what is needed and what is demanded by the world.
Thanks, Ricardo. And I mean, absolutely agree from multiple standpoints to both yourself, to Nishat, to Angela, but also very important to Stefan's video, which we watched at the beginning, and to what Carlo also shared. I think these are very important. On one side, we need urgent action. That has to happen. Urgent action is only going to be possible if we start working together. So we've done a bit of the blame game, which is very important because people need to be blamed when they do the wrong thing. And that has been going on. That is essential. But we need that cooperation to foster action. And now I'm beginning to think, and I'm going to turn to Maddie very soon to come in with any other question. And please, our audience, please bring in your questions. We have these amazing young leaders who have been part of the climate conversation for years to really share their insights with us. But before I turn to Maddie for anything, Nishat, Ricardo, Angela, for any of you, in terms of partnership and cooperation, what is missing at the moment? One way or the other, you both talked about it. So what really needs to be done? It's not a new terminology. It has been existing for years. So what is the pain point that is not making this possible?
Well, I just have one term: funding.
Funding, okay. It's the money. All right. Angela and Ricardo, what do you think?
I can see on one term, goodwill of citizens and realizing that climate change is not something out that far, but right now, because it is hard sometimes to persuade, especially like the older part of our generation. They think that it is some kind of a theory that is going on. So I think that realization of the situation and education, climate education, definitely.
Great. Urgency, and that can only be achieved if people are aware and they know how urgent it is. So the realization of that. Thank you very much, Angela. Ricardo.
So I must echo Nishad's words, money. In the end, in governments, money speaks louder than actions and even words, right? And what we've been hearing right now is a lot of words, a lot of policy speak, a lot of goals for the next 30 years, but where's the money at? And where is it directed? And where is it actually funding those organizations that are right now in the ground zero, working for these solutions? So we're not really looking at that funding. So yes, I'll definitely echo that as one of the biggest issues currently.
Great, very good to know and very insightful, because then I am very confident that we're having this session and we're empowering our audience and everyone watching us to walk away with two key things to foster cooperation for the actions that are needed. One, put the money on the table. Two, get everyone to understand how urgent the situation is. Maddie, is there anything from your side in terms of questions to our brilliant panelists here?
Well, I am curious, but first of all, thanks guys for your really insightful answers. I am really curious though. Funding has been, you've all said the importance of this, but aside from funding, what do you think are some of the key things that the international community could do to help your situations? What kind of things could be done? The concerted efforts outside of your countries to really help your personal situations improve?
Okay, so I was quite negative at the beginning. Now I would like to showcase the positive side. For example, even though the situation is still critical, as I have represented, there are some great efforts to save the ecosystem by the governments, but also the United Nations partnership that we have and UNDP for undeveloped countries, and also the citizens themselves who understood the urgency behind that. For example, you asked what could be done. So, for example, now our farmers have started to take for example, more cultural practices. If more of them take these cultural practices in their day-to-day life, also the situation will be better. Moreover, thousands of tons of waste that are dumped in the lake can be transformed into high-quality compost. The government can help the farmers to reduce their pesticides and also can make treatment plans to prevent harmful runoff. So there are some kind of these types of nature-based solutions that can be incorporated really easily only if we bridge the money, as we said, the education and the goodwill of government and the people, of course.
Yes, certainly. We'll need a concerted effort from several different sides that also take into account things like agriculture as well. I feel like often in climate, biodiversity and ecological stuff often get almost forgotten about or left behind when making climate policy. That's very good point, Angela. Thank you. Nishad, Ricardo, do you have another take?
So I wanted to jump really quickly on one solution, and specifically science-based solutions. They always come from research. They always come from academia, from participation in science-based efforts. And specifically the problem that has been hindering development in developing countries is that we are still an economy of production, right? We're still looking towards agriculture. We're still looking at development on terms of units of exported goods. However, we're seeing the developing countries investing in phones, in touch screens, in all of that. And of course, that we haven't had that leap towards development and towards research. And specifically with climate change, I believe that what we have to do is that we have to engage developing countries and also poverty-stricken countries to support them, to support their academias, to support their NGOs, to engage in solutions that are going to be more practical in their sense, because what we're doing in most developing countries is just taking the same mitigation scenarios or the same mitigation efforts that perhaps are very logical in big countries, in countries or continents like Europe, in Asia, however, that are rarely scalable or perhaps not as impactful as climate adaptation would be if it were science-based and if it were focused in developing countries. So I'm going to close on that. Of course, there are many things that I would love to say here, but I think, and I'm sure that we need more support towards research efforts in developing countries.
Certainly, there definitely needs to be, I agree with you, more capacity building, more technology sharing, and science-led policymaking, especially for these most vulnerable countries. I mean, Nishad, are you on the same page as Ricardo with that?
I go with Ricardo. Of course, in our part of the world, young people look up for green jobs. That's where technology comes in. That bring green jobs to industry where we are profoundly belonging to fossil fuel industries. And they are very attractive in terms of payment scales for young people. But we wanted to bring sort of jobs that are more research oriented towards solar technologies, geoengineering. I see a question on the chat also, your thoughts about geoengineering. We've been quite tried in this part of the world in the Gulf where rains are very minimal. And of course, when it rains, it also brings chaos here as well, to be frank. But the UAE has been trying with playing with the nature, what we call, to bring artificial rains for some time. Hasn't been successful, I believe. It's been not tried every year, but they've been the one known for trying artificial rains over the time with cloud engineering and stuff. I think that's not a long-term solution. That doesn't work in that way for me. Personally, I believe technology can bring up, but that's what technology is in making some difficult decision because of they wanted to have own agricultural system, right? Like in the Gulf of the Middle East, we are 100% dependent, almost 99% dependent on food materials from across the globe. So we always want to be self-sufficient in the coming days. So a lot of research on hydroponics and stuffs are happening on the ground, which is promising. Also with the soil engineering, making sure, because our soil are not fertile for agriculture, because the desert soil is like the sand, which doesn't work for agriculture. So a lot of stuff of research in terms of having own sustainable agricultural system. We're also not to have a lot of even our dairy products used to come from across the world, but now we are also having self-sufficient dairies in our country. In a way, country want to have self-sufficient, but also comes with that question: at what cost of environment? Because our systems are not very much made for that. Is it fine to get something from Ghana rather than having something in Doha? It's a big question. Like you need to do the science to understand what exactly that means. What is the life cycle of that product's been brought here? So ideally for me, I would go with Ricardo. A lot of research has to be done. The science is clear how we can do the stuff, but sometimes our policy and politics comes in between. They just make sure stay in power, and they want to serve the people. So sometimes it's a political decision to come up with some ideas that win a big win for the country, and people love such sort of announcement by the country leaders. But at the same time, I think a lot of research, especially in educational sectors, so that young people find much appropriate jobs where they feel these days they're more committed than elsewhere. I see the drastic change in this part of the world where people used to always see oil and gas as the best industry to work in. Now towards, in the past we didn't even have courses like sustainable energy and sustainable development, etc. Now the universities are coming with those sort of courses in the region, because most of the time you used to go to the western part to study those and come back, and you don't have industry to work. That's like most of the time what we had in the past. Now the educational systems are moving in the same way. I see there is a vision from the leaders here, but it needs more push, because as you know, in the Middle East and North Africa do have almost 60 to 70% who are 30 and below. That's a huge mass of young people coming out to the job market. So if you're not ready, that will be creating a big vacuum of not having job, which is into green sector. So it is critical, you're investing on education, investing on research would definitely help this region. That's what I want to see in the coming days. Thank
you, Nishad. Thank you. That I had no idea that statistic about the Middle East and North Africa. That's an incredible number of young people growing up, and hopefully with the education, with that kind of education, to be able to take action, and so importantly at the grassroots level, as you mentioned earlier. Now, Josh, I believe we are about to go on our break.
Yes, we are about to, but before we do that, just to reconnect some of the dots from the session. First of all, thanks everyone who contributed to this. It's been very wonderful and amazing. Three key things for me that is very standout from this session. One is we cannot wait. So the impacts are here. So certain targets of 2050, 2030, as Ricardo had mentioned, as we heard from Carlo, this is not enough. We cannot wait for 2050. We cannot wait for the future. The impacts are happening today, so we need to act today. How do we do that? Very key message. We need people to understand this. We need the education to get to people so they understand how urgent climate change is and how present these impacts are. So that is very key for us to take with us as part of our work we do on an everyday basis to really make people aware of the impacts of climate change. It's not something for the future, it's something happening today. Third thing, finance. So geoengineering, nature-based solution, ecosystem-based adaptation, whatever be it, we're gonna need the money to do that. So, and once the money is not there, all these fantastic ideas are gonna hold and we're not gonna be able to make progress. So climate change is gonna keep being a personal story for many people. It's gonna keep knocking people into poverty and knocking all of us down from our ambitions unless we put the money on the table for actions to take place. So 3 key things that came out of the session. Really, thanks a lot. And it's been very beautiful hearing from the Pacific, from New Zealand, all the way to Doha, then coming to North Macedonia. I mean, this is amazing. This is impressive. So really great to have such a geographically diverse panel to share their thoughts with us. Really, thanks everyone. And I'm going to pass it over to Maddie.
Thank you, Josh, for the wrap up there. So yeah, we have our break now, and we have 2 things to mention before we head off. So the first is we wanted to show the diversity of the participants who showed interest in the summit today. So you can see from this pie chart, we have covered almost all continents. There are none from Antarctica, unfortunately, but if we do take a closer look at the countries, you can see just how many places all of you are from. So this is really special, truly a world first in having so many young people, a diversity of young people from around the world together to discuss climate intervention. So thank you guys once again for your participation, and also to our amazing speakers. And the second thing is to help relax our minds during the break. We have some music put together by 2 students based in The Hague in the Netherlands, or where I live. So we hope you guys can kick back and enjoy.
Thanks, Maddie and Josh, and thank you SilverLining and YOUNGO for inviting us to perform at this event.
We are Louis and Antonio, and over the last few days, we've put together a piece of original music for the summit.
It's a real pleasure for us to be performing from our wee flat in The Hague alongside such talented speakers.
So, with special thanks to Ella Wang Olsen for the visuals, we hope you enjoy.
That was beautiful. That was really, really beautiful. I mean, in other virtual events, there is you need to get creative to get people to really be present with us after hearing, and also when discussing very important issues like climate change and its impact. So really, thanks for such a beautiful break. I was certainly relaxed, and I hope everyone here had the chance to relax and also be able to synthesize the conversation a little bit more. And I've seen the Q&A is getting very vibrant. We're going to keep an eye on these questions, and we're going to get a chance to address them much more. So please keep them coming. We will definitely appreciate that. In this next session, we're going to have a very brilliant conversation, which is going to start with a video. But before I pass it on to Maddie to talk to us about a video, one thing that I want everyone to sort of keep an eye on is that please really watch this video, pay attention to it, and try to think around what are the questions that comes to your mind as you watch the video, because whoever is behind this video is going to be with us today, and you will get the chance to interact with these people, which means that brilliant opportunity, but you can only interact if you really paid attention and be able to ask questions afterwards. So I'm going to pass it on to Maddie, and I'm counting on your cooperation in watching, listen carefully, and asking questions afterwards. Maddie, over to you.
Thank you, Joshua. To be honest, I couldn't have put it better myself. So this is a clip, from the TV series Nova, and it's a perfect way to set the stage and introduce the realities of climate intervention research. And like you said, Josh, we have two of those researchers here with us today who appear in this TV series episode. So please, guys, do ask your questions. We will get the chance to have that conversation later on. So with that, let's see the video.
Are rising temperatures driving Earth's ecosystems past a point of no return?
We can't go back. There is no path backwards.
Every year, the damages are worse.
We have promising technologies that put solutions within our grasp. But are we reaching far enough?
We have to have emissions cut to zero.
Even if we stop emitting CO2, we still have the CO2 we've already emitted.
So scientists are building a new toolkit.
It has power
to ensure a prosperous future.
Our society has to survive.
We need to reduce the heating effect.
Cutting-edge solutions.
It's going to be revolutionary.
It's really important that humanity has a backstop.
In a race to discover, can we cool the planet? A world of carbon-free energy is coming. But climate impacts are coming faster.
Lasers are at power. There it is.
So scientists are opening a second front in the battle.
Sweet, it has power.
Bringing new technologies to bear on the way we fight climate change.
We now have so much data. This is going to be a game changer.
There are a whole class of solutions to actually get this job all the way done.
By removing CO2 from the air.
This little guy, this is just the beginning.
Converting CO2 from a waste to a resource.
We see this kind of as a testing ground.
Even extreme measures, like shielding us from the sun.
We need to look at everything that's out there. Natural solutions, CO2 sequestration, solar geoengineering. There may be this idea out there that nobody has come up with yet that could be really transformative.
The easiest thing, believe it or not, is to burn less carbon, right? To not generate the CO2 in the first place.
Carbon-free energy like wind, solar, and nuclear power can drive down most of our annual emissions. And the rest could be offset with negative emissions technologies that remove CO2 from the air.
We will do it. We will get to the day where there'll be global celebrations. We get to net zero day, where we brought human CO2 emissions to zero. I think it'll happen in my lifetime. It is doable. But on that day, we have not solved the climate problem. All we've done is stop making it worse.
The problem that remains is heat.
The temperature of the Earth is determined by heat coming in from the sun and heat going out by radiation out to space.
Every single day, CO2 from our past emissions traps energy in the Earth's system. The same amount of energy as 500,000 of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima, detonating at once. That heat is altering our climate.
What's it going to be like when, 3 months of the year are 115 degrees? When vast ecosystems have died out? People are going to push for doing something about this.
And many fear Earth is approaching a tipping point that will trigger rapid change.
The uncertainties that keep me up at night are, what if we aren't doing enough and there's some monster lurking behind the door that all of a sudden comes out into the world among us? It's a good idea that humanity has some sort of a backstop technology, something to do if we get surprised in a way that is very, very dangerous.
Some think that backstop could be solar geoengineering.
It's a way to intercept sunlight coming into the planet to cool the planet.
Geoengineering the climate is a controversial idea. But nature can show us examples of where we might start. Clouds.
A cloud is just water that's condensed down onto particles into small droplets.
These collections of droplets are, in effect, floating sun reflectors.
Clouds play a huge role in controlling the climate because they control the reflectivity of the planet. Especially over the ocean, you go from sunlight hitting a very dark surface where a lot of the sunlight is absorbed to sunlight hitting extremely bright surface, reflecting a lot of that sunlight back to space.
Sarah Doherty of the Marine Cloud Brightening Project is working on a way to boost that effect.
Can we add really small sea salt particles to clouds in a way that significantly increases their brightness and do so over enough of the ocean that we would have a significant impact on the global temperature?
But how do you make saltwater particles and launch them up into clouds?
What we need is a nozzle, like you'd see in a sort of a snowblower, except that the particles that we want to produce are about 1,000th the width of a human hair.
So Sarah's working with an engineer who knows all about machines for spraying superfine droplets, a concept developer of the earliest inkjet printers.
In a different life, I was an engineer and a physicist. I couldn't enjoy retirement anymore and just sit there, watch what's going on. Once you know what's going to happen or might happen, you can't sit down and say, yeah, I'm just going to enjoy life.
Armand and his team of retired scientists have been developing a cloud brightening machine for over 10 years.
They have been self-funding this research in borrowed lab space. Park is a really good place for them because of our history with aerosols.
Park, or Palo Alto Research Center, has infused the Marine Cloud Brightening Project with fresh expertise and cutting-edge tools. Here, Kate Murphy can make aerosols from just about anything.
This is our deep conditioner.
Aerosols are tiny particles suspended in air.
This is ketchup.
For clouds, they're not going to spray ketchup. But Kate can help the team design a nozzle for spraying salt water.
Let me just give it a little water, okay?
Kate's expertise will help optimize the size and speed of the particles to propel them into marine clouds.
So you're going to be redesigning the nozzle based on your computational fluid dynamics.
Well, we hope to be able to understand the effect of multiple nozzles. So we would want to measure things like velocity and direction.
These crisscrossed laser beams can help reveal whether Armand's nozzle will hit the mark.
The lasers are at power. Looks like our signal's pretty good.
So can you measure the vertical velocity? Do you have a measurement of that? That
Yes.
would be of great interest to us.
Park will be working on developing a full spray system, and then we would want to move outside into real atmospheric conditions.
On the other side of the world, outdoor research has already begun. Armand and the team have shared their insights with researchers in Australia who are testing cloud brightening as a way to cool the waters surrounding the threatened coral of the reef. That project is targeted and local, but some estimate that cloud brightening on a global scale could offset all the heat trapped by our CO2 emissions.
It will probably take a good 15 to 20 years to do all of the research involved with understanding how big of an effect we could have by brightening clouds and also what all of the side effects might be.
Those side effects are not well understood and could include disruptions to ecosystems and rainfall patterns. Further research is needed.
We have kids, we have grandkids, we're doing it for their futures.
You know, and frankly, we are all in this together, whether you have kids or not. We're more than individuals. Our society has to survive.
So I hope that video has really got the brain juices flowing as we go into the rest of session 2. So first of all, we have a focus Q&A with Josh and I with our 3 amazing speakers. We were really lucky to have such inspiring scientists with us today. First, I will be speaking with one of the featured scientists, Sarah Doherty. So yes, as we know, she is the program director of the Marine Cloud Brightening Project, as featured in the video just played. She is also an atmospheric scientist, and these are both with the University of Washington. And she has co-authored several leading articles in the field of climate science. So hello, Sarah, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Not at all, it's a pleasure. So perhaps some of the questions we'll tackle here will speak to what some of our participants have been wondering so far. So the first of which is I wanted to know, well, because often we see a conflation of research into climate intervention with actually doing it in real life. And so could you tell us a bit more about what the differences between those are and why it's important to make those distinctions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of the physical risks, the risks to the environment and humans, ecosystems and economies, the two are completely different. So the physical risks of doing the research are extremely minimal. And this research will provide critical information about whether or not we have options for reducing heat in the Earth system and possibly avoiding the worst impacts of climate change during the period where we work to reduce greenhouse gas concentrations to safer levels. And it's important to realize that many of the things we need to study in climate intervention research are not fundamentally different from what we're doing when we study climate in general. This involves computer modeling across a really big range of scales, and then doing really small scale studies in the field, like I talked about in the video briefly. And these studies, for example, would present smaller perturbations to the environment than the emissions from like a handful of aircraft doing intercontinental flights or a handful of cargo ships transiting the ocean. Actual implementation of a climate intervention would, of course, result in impacts to ecosystems and human systems, since by definition, this would involve changing climate at a regional to global scale. But these impacts, both good and bad, can't be viewed in isolation. The whole goal behind climate intervention, if you were to do it, is to actually reduce the impacts of global warming. So what we need to do is identify the risk portfolio associated with global warming under realistic climate trajectories versus the risk portfolio of the same trajectory, but with some suite of climate intervention options implemented. And we heard in the previous panel about what some of these impacts are starting to look like. And in this comparison of impacts with and without climate intervention, it's going to be absolutely critical that we get input from all of the communities around the globe so that we know what types of impacts we should be looking at, what things are important at the local level. And then people can make decisions about what they think the best risk portfolio is.
Thank you, Sarah. I think a lot of people are not aware of those distinctions and just like these experiments, what they actually mean in real life. And I really hope that our audience will come up with some more questions that we can pose to you when we come all together for the audience Q&A later on. But before we go on, I just wanted to ask one other small thing. In the NOVA video, you mentioned it would take maybe 20 years for us to know the potential effects of marine cloud brightening. So what does that actually mean in practical terms? Climate change is here and now. So is that time span too long to help us?
Yeah, so I don't really, buy into the idea of of a solution like this, sort of being too late to even consider. The reality is that society is constantly making decisions with imperfect information. And it's not as if there'll be some point in time when we have a complete and perfect set of information, at 20 years' time about climate intervention mechanisms. So with each stage of research that's completed, we learn things that can contribute to the decision process about how we want to go forward. And there's a lot we already know about how climate intervention at a broad scale would affect climate. But yes, it's true that we're very early in the research in this area. But that also means that we can rapidly learn a lot. So at the moment, we're really reliant on using models to understand how effective climate intervention would be and what its impacts would be. So it's really important that we do small scale experiments to test and improve the models in order to build confidence in our projections of how implementation would affect climate. But it's specifically because these experiments are small, done at a small scale, and won't have big physical impacts that we need to do a series of them where we incrementally build knowledge. And the reality is that this takes time to plan, to do the data analysis, and to have that all feed back to the climate models that improve our understanding. So the sooner we get started, the sooner we'll acquire knowledge about whether or not we have options to reduce climate warming and the associated impacts and how these options would play out relative to unabated warming.
Well, we can contrast those kinds of images and scenarios you just described to the ideas people sometimes get with the space mirrors and these kind of more sci-fi sounding experiments, and really like we're getting it from one of the leading researchers in this area. It's incremental, small scale experiments, and that's the reality of that kind of science and research at the moment. So yeah, thank you, Sarah, and we'll be coming back for our Q&A all together in just a moment, but I will hand over now to Josh. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thanks a lot, Sarah, and thanks, Maddie. So the next person that I'm going to have a chat with is Kate Murphy, and if you want to have a very easy introduction to Kate Murphy, and if you look at the video we watched earlier, she was the one designing something to spray ketchup in the clouds, except that they're not going to spray ketchup in the clouds, but something else. Kate is working as an engineering lead at the Marine Cloud Brightening project, and she has a video she took from the Palo Alto Research Center, which she's going to share with us. So we're going to have that, and then I'm going to have a little chat with Kate.
So what you're seeing here is one of our spray nozzles, which operates by forcing very high pressure air and seawater through a small orifice. And you can see that the water is coming out of the nozzle at very high speed. What you can't see are a lot of the much smaller droplets, which are not visible to the naked eye. So there's actually a lot more water coming out of this nozzle than you can even see on the camera. If we can go over to the other video of the tent. So this is the next stage of our experiment. So as I mentioned, there was a lot of water coming out of that nozzle. And so we need a large volume in which to spray because we want to kind of mimic an outdoor volume. When we spray inside of a small room, the spray can actually hit the ceiling, and then we can't get representative measurements of what's coming out. So what you're seeing here is a 25 by 50 foot tent that we built out at park, outside obviously, in which we can do our spray experiments. And you'll notice that there's not much stuff in the tent because we wanted to maintain as large of an empty volume as possible. You can see in the first half second of the video or so, that's where all of our equipment is. We've got a big fan for mixing the air around. The computer is back there to operate some of our measurement equipment. And then all we really have in there is some air handlers to clean the air. We've got some dehumidifiers, and that's it. So really this tent is here just for having a large volume.
Wow, that sounds very impressive. And as much as impressive as it sounds, I'm tempted to ask Kate, what is the most challenging part of developing this?
Yeah, so the hardest thing is making a nozzle that can create these tiny droplets in an energy efficient manner. So one thing that was really surprising to me about this research topic is how difficult it is to spray tiny droplets of water. You know, one would think that spraying water is a solved problem, but it's not. It's actually very hard to spray droplets that are in the sizes, the very tiny sizes that we need. And so, you know, we can do that, but the energy required to do that in conventional means is just astronomical. You know, we would like to run these nozzles off of a solar panel eventually. And so we need to make very energy efficient nozzles. So that's where we are right now. We're working with single nozzles, trying to make them more energy efficient, producing the size of droplets that Sarah's team tells us that we need. And then eventually we would start to scale up. So by scaling up, I mean 2 nozzles and then 3 nozzles and seeing how they interact. You know, what are the engineering challenges and how to multiplex them.
Wow. I mean, I'm just going to be as naive as possible. So we're spraying these things in the air, and I'm just thinking, won't they evaporate, for instance? I mean, you're going to spray a bunch of stuff in the air. I mean, these are very tiny droplets. The heat is going to hit on them. Are they not going to evaporate?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's the idea. So the droplets evaporate, but because we would be spraying seawater, the droplets will evaporate down to tiny little crystals of sea salt, which, you know, you can buy at the store. But those little particles of sea salt will be even tinier than the droplets. So the the particles of sea salt will be about 1/4 of the size of the droplets of water. And those sea salt particles will be hopefully so tiny that it's easy for them to rise up into the cloud layer, where you could nucleate cloud droplets and make the clouds more reflective.
Interesting. Okay, this sounds good. So, Kate, where are we? Where are we with this development? I mean, in terms of practicality, when is this going to happen, and what can we expect from your team and your research? From my side, it's very interesting to also know that there's a bunch of retired scientists working with you. I think that is very impressive, because it's great that we can leverage on people who've committed years of their life learning. When they get into retirement, mostly we don't get the most out of them, but this is really impressive to know. But to the question, where are we?
Yes, I mean, working with those guys is so inspiring. I mean, they have so much experience and so much passion. I mean, they could be sitting on a beach, and instead they're coming to work 4 days a week, you know, despite any, you know, health problems or, you know, partners at home who would like them to stay and spend their retirement with them. So where we are with the development is, you know, as I mentioned, we have the single nozzle. We are working to optimize that nozzle and working to examine the effects of multiple nozzles. You know, as Sarah mentioned, these experiments take a lot of time. We're being very careful and very deliberate. We're doing things indoors as much as possible and in controlled environments so that we really understand the science. You know, we don't want to get outside and have any surprises. If we're spraying outside, it's because we have a very good idea of what we're going to see. And we're just doing verification.
Great, thanks a lot, Kate. Very, very helpful. And we're gonna come back with the Q&A from the audience and all that. And for now, I'm gonna turn to Maddie. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you, Kate. It's really interesting to hear that scaling up means adding one nozzle to one nozzle. That is the kind of pace and stage of the research that you guys are undertaking over at Parker with the Marine Cloud Brightening Project. So with that, we are going on to our next speaker. We have Barrett with us here today. Since 2015, she has been the vice chair of the IPCC, and she's also the deputy assistant administrator for research at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, also known as NOAA. She's an expert on climate policy, and for 15 years, she has represented the US on delegations charged with negotiating and adopting scientific assessments undertaken by the IPCC. So hello, and welcome.
Hi, I'm one of those people who's inching towards retirement, one of those retirement-ready scientists.
No, you don't look a day over 20, Come on. Well, okay, well, I mean, let's take a step back for our questions. I wanted to start out broad here. Could you tell us how climate intervention research relates to climate science more generally, and why that is perhaps useful?
Yeah, so Sarah touched on this a bit in her remarks, but I'll just say the research needed to understand potential climate interventions, be they marine cloud brightening or cirrus cloud thinning or even stratospheric aerosol injection, is largely the research that we need to do anyway to advance climate science writ large. So for example, the IPCC in its last assessment had an entire chapter dedicated to clouds and aerosols and their central role in producing accurate climate model projections of our future climate. And that chapter started with the statement that clouds and aerosols continue to contribute the largest uncertainty to estimates and interpretations of the Earth's changing energy budget. So there's a lot of uncertainty in that space. And since precipitation and evaporation are projected to increase on average in a warmer climate, we need to better understand these phenomena with more urgency. In addition, the stratosphere, that is the layer of our atmosphere from about 6 to 30 miles up, just above where planes fly, is very important to our understanding of climate and weather, but it is currently so underobserved because it's frankly hard to get observations that high up. But this is where the ozone layer is, just to give you a sense of why that region is so important to understand. Anyway, I hope this helps to point out that the research we're undertaking as we consider climate intervention is, in many cases, the same research we need to fill gaps in our knowledge about the climate system.
Most definitely. I mean, that just reminded me of a class I had. I do governance and sustainability. I'm a master's student, and during the climate change course, we did clouds. The effect of climate change on clouds and cloud behavior was one of the biggest unknowns, and it's interesting to see how this kind of research can open that knowledge up. But I was just so surprised that was still such an unknown at this stage in the climate crisis. It's interesting. But going away from kind of the more scientific nitty-gritty research side of things, I wanted to ask you about also the state of climate intervention in international policy. What is the state of affairs within the IPCC at this stage?
Sure. Well, so let me just start by clarifying that the IPCC is an intergovernmental science assessment body. We don't do policy and we don't undertake our own research even. The value of the IPCC is that we bring together scientists from around the world, from many scientific disciplines, to assess the broad state of knowledge about our climate system. We do that by putting out an assessment about every 7 years or so to help decision makers and increasingly the public to understand what we know about how the climate has changed and what is likely to happen to Earth in the future. Also, as I said, IPCC is very careful about sharing this knowledge in a neutral way, not advocating for this policy or that policy. And so therefore IPCC, assesses our knowledge about climate intervention, just as it does any other climate relevant topic, right? But I will say that if you look at what the IPCC has to say about the increasing threats from climate change that we're already seeing, I thought that video and Will's comments earlier were just spot on. The threats that we're already seeing, be it from melting glaciers and ice sheets, which cause sea level rise, to wildfires, droughts, heat waves on land and even in the ocean, to the movement of fish to cooler waters closer to the poles, and away from where people depend on them for sustenance. It's clear that the threat of inaction to reduce greenhouse gases carries its risks. So the climate changes that threaten life as we know it, it's not something that most are prepared to accept. If you think of it this way, I find myself needing to balance the risk of abrupt and irreversible changes with the feasibility and the safety of potential interventions. The two are really interconnected in my mind. And I wish there were easy answers, but I don't think there are right now. So this kind of leaves me personally open-minded.
So with that, I think that gives us a good basis to enter our Q&A with the audience. I'm sure I think we've got some more questions lined up. So thank you so much, Co. If we could bring in Kate and Sarah with us as well. Hi guys, thanks for standing by. So, right, do we have a question from the audience? Here we go.
I'm gonna go with one, Maddie.
Go on, Josh.
Great. So there's one thing that I saw in the comments from the audience, and I think it's one way I want us to address first before we run out of time or anything. When people generally think around technological interventions for climate, right? It's always gonna be a question of, is it gonna support livelihoods? Is it gonna support people? How does that interfere with traditional practices, right? So given the conversation we're having now and reflecting on a couple of comments I saw in the Q&A section, my question is, how does this really affect the way indigenous communities advocate around climate interventions along the lines of let's work together with nature for nature? So when you think about that and you reflect on the work you do, what are your thoughts on this? Anyone can go. Just open question around. I'm happy to have anyone take it. But when you think of these sort of technological solutions and spraying into the sky or whatever thing it could be, the question is, and we think around indigenous communities and ethics around sort of land, soil, and earth, and all of that. Is there a conflict here, or there's no conflict at all, and we are all on the same page?
Well, okay, I'll take a shot at that. I think that, so like I referenced that, we obviously need to understand whether these things are feasible, like whether they could actually be used to cool climate significantly as a starting point. And then if they can, what would be the impacts if we did use them? And that's where I think there isn't a conflict. I think in that process of answering that question, we need to go to those communities and say, what is important to you? What's, in what ways are you going to be impacted the most? What are the variables that you think are the most important to you locally, so that when we do those impact studies, we can understand how climate intervention would affect those things specifically. So I don't think it's so much a conflict. I think it's just a need for communication and information. And that's, we're trying to work with those communities and finding out about what impacts are important to them locally. And again, by doing the research, like Co pointed out, this, there is a separation between the science and the decisions that are made. And so the research is really there to provide the information about what would happen. And then it's up to decision makers to decide, do we want to do that? What suite of things do we think are the right answers? And of course, that is something that needs to have input from people all over the globe. It's not a single body top down making that decision. Does that make sense?
Great. That makes a lot of sense. I work in the background of disaster risk reduction and disaster management and ecosystem-based adaptation and CBA. And I hear you, and I absolutely agree in the context of let's talk to communities and let's understand what is the most essential things to preserve. And there's a concept of riskscapes, which I studied about 2 years ago, where it talks about the human social reference to items and places. So while we might think that, I mean, a church is the most valuable thing for a particular community, sometimes it's also just a tree. Sometimes it's a cup. Sometimes it's a stone. So it could be anything.
That's
And
right.
the concept of sort of understanding that in one community and trying to make it applicable for somewhere else doesn't always work, because we are just humans with so many different needs and associations to different things. So really great in bringing this insight of when it comes to these interventions, primarily point is talking to communities to understand how do we work together in terms of different fields of studies and backgrounds to make these solutions worth it. And also re-emphasize the point before that the impacts are going to happen and we need to get ready for it. So we need to do whatever we can, whatever means possible, whatever ways is the safest to protect lives. And I'm going to shut up now and give it up to the experts to talk.
Josh, could I just follow up on those points though, and maybe put a different spin, because I think you're bringing up, say, the reference to indigenous communities is an interesting entry point for the following, because the research shows when you are looking to solve complex problems, you are better off having people involved who come from diverse backgrounds, diverse training, diverse perspectives, including indigenous perspectives. So when we attack the problem, we're attacking it from every direction, including the ones we can't see because of our own implicit biases, right? The brain works in a way that we're very efficient in processing information, but we all do it differently. And we block out things that can be really meaningful to the problem solving. So bringing a lot of people together, looking at it from every side is really important. So, and then I asked myself, what problem is more complex than climate change, right? So, you know, in the IPCC and even in my work at NOAA, we've recognized that, you know, we need people from all around the world to be involved in finding solutions from every perspective. Yes, you know, like we need scientists, but we need indigenous communities. We need folks from the social sciences, like psychology, to help us understand, you know, how to remain hopeful sometimes or inspire us to action. I think we even need storytellers and artists and you know, you name it, to kind of instill a strong motivation for innovation and creative thinking to help solve this really complex problem.
Thank you very much, Ko. That was fantastic. And recently, I've also seen that for some of the conferences I'm engaging in, we're beginning to leverage on people who are very great with arts and artwork. And I saw this with the Red Cross. The Red Cross Climate Center started putting artists into these conversations, saying that they follow conversations, and at the end of the day, they have sort of a graphical representation of the whole session in one artwork, right? So I think that is definitely true, because not everyone can listen and follow. Not everyone can watch the video and get it. And not everyone can just read the IPCC reports and be on track. So we need a combination of everything to make it work. Maddie, please, over to you. Any question from your side?
Yes, so I was curious to ask you guys, like, why, from a researcher's point of view, you guys are part of the older generations, why does this research matter particularly for young people from your points of view?
So I think it's important to emphasize that we are not advocating yet for implementation. We are only advocating for research. If we were to implement this, you know, it would be a decision made years down the line. And young people are the ones who would be, you know, dealing with the implications of doing that. So it's important to engage young people now, because they will be the decision makers at the time when we would potentially need this technology.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's important for the youth. It's important because, you know, if we fail to act, they are also the ones that will be dealing with the consequences of climate change.
Definitely. I mean, not only do we need, like, I guess, a diversity of people looking at this, but also young people in particular, because, I mean, as those near-term climate threats become here and now, well, they are here and now, but as 2030, 2040 comes along, ultimately we are going to be the ones making those decisions at the end of the day. I wonder, Ko or Sarah, do you have your takes on that?
I guess I'll jump in. I think Will referenced in the earlier session this report that the IPCC put out about 1.5 degrees of warming. And, you know, as the woman from the Pacific mentioned, that report really came about because of a push, especially by Pacific Island nations, to say 1.5 degrees is where we are worried we're going to start to see dangerous effects. And they really pushed, as she said, they pushed the Paris Agreement to adopt lower temperature targets for action. So they also, in the Paris Agreement, asked the IPCC to do a report on what would happen if we were able to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And that report talked about possible mitigation pathways that could keep us to 1.5 degrees of warming. And I won't go into all the details of that, but I will say this. One thing that came about because of that report is all of a sudden, this distant temperature target was very real and very soon and almost now. And even for me, I've been working in climate for 25 years. I was like, oh my gosh, like this, there is a sense of urgency. I'm embarrassed to say that, you know, I didn't necessarily have it so much until you start to think that this is right now. And when I listen to younger advocates and younger scientists, they are very much focused on this is now issue. And I think that then keeps people open to all kinds of options that will potentially keep us safe in the near term while we solve this problem in the long term.
Definitely. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Those are the challenges we face. It is here and now, and we need to make these critical decisions now so that we can make those informed choices later on. So thank you so much, guys, Kate, Ko, and Sarah. That's us at the end of our Q&A. And so just to wrap up, I think there's been some key points coming out of this. One of which I think is, you know, the climate intervention research right now, it's small, it's very small scale, it's very incremental, it's happening inside of makeshift tents in Northern California. So these are the kinds of conditions you guys are working with, and ultimately it's a weighing of risk. It's a weighing of seeing, you know, what can this tell us compared to what we already know that's going on. Another thing you guys mentioned, you know, we need a great diversity of people looking at this. We need to talk to people on the ground, bring in those people from the social sciences, psychology, everything, to help us move forward and basically make effective decisions on this. And yeah, of course, this matters for young people because, yeah, like Kate, you mentioned, we will be making the decisions on this. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your insights. And I will hand this over to Josh to send us off for our break.
Great. Thanks a lot, Maddie, and thanks to our panelists, Kate, Ko, and Sarah. Very fantastic work they are doing. Very great to hear the summary from you, Maddie. And before we get to the next session, we're gonna have a 5 minutes break. Grab yourself a tea or a coffee or an ice cream, whatever works for you with the weather you have. And then we'll regather again in about 5 minutes. And when we are back, we are going to have a session on youth and climate intervention. Thank you and see you very soon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to session 3, where we will be getting stuck into the topic and having some intergenerational dialogues on climate intervention. To begin this session, we have a presentation from British youth activist Gideon Futurman. He has just finished high school, so congratulations, Gideon, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on with us.
Thank you very much for having me. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen to quickly start my presentation. So this is a presentation on youth and solar radiation management, sometimes called solar geoengineering, those sort of climate interventions that were spoken about in the last session. The way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to give a brief introduction to me, and apologies in advance, there are some criminally bad selfies on slide 3. I'm then going to give an argument why youth in general need to be involved in the discussion around SRM, irrespective of their viewpoint. And then I'm going to give a defense of researching SRM from an intergenerational justice perspective, as well as touch on other issues surrounding justice as well. So I'm hoping that you can see that this has changed slides. So just a quick about me. I'm a climate activist based in London, England. I've been involved in many organizations over the 3 years that I've been a climate activist. I founded an organization called Worldwood, which we grew to an organization that was across the world. I've also been involved in an organization called Natural Climate Solutions, promoting natural climate solutions, and YOUNGO, which has helped to promote, run this event, as well as in the early stages of organizing the COI 16 event. I've also had some degree of focus on individual action as well, as you can hopefully see on the next slide, which is when I went on my school trip to Poland. I took a 27-hour coach journey, which was interesting, to say the least. I've also, and over the last few years, I've also become involved in solar radiation management research, having last year at the age of 17 published a paper on it. As far as I can tell, the youngest researcher to have published a paper on it, as well as educating people on it. I'm 18 now, hence the pretty rubbish beard, and I'm carrying on doing this, having now just finished school and going to university next year. So the first question I'm going to hope to address here is why we need more young people involved. Why it is so important in general, irrespective of their viewpoint, for more young youth to be involved in discussion around SRM. But the first fact to know before we start discussing is there are so few young people involved. And the young people that are involved aren't given a platform to speak about it. By so few, I mean, you could probably count the number on 2 hands of young people properly involved talking about it in this space, and the number that are given any degree of a platform. And this is on both sides of the argument, those who are pro-research and those who are anti-research as well. This is, as far as I can tell, this was published in Physics Today, the first article in somewhat major publication that quoted a young person. That young person was me. I'm not, that shouldn't really be happening. I'm not that impressive. And this is it. One young person from the global north. This is the first time that one has been spoken about in a major publication. This was an event that happened last week. Quite a lot of people were very, very, very anti-research. Apparently there's youth in the title of the event, and yet the young person who was speaking, which was Greta, only spoke for about less than 2.5% of the event. One young person from the global north speaking for less than 2.5% of the event. Young people are not allowed to speak for themselves in this space as much. We're not given a platform, but also there aren't young people in this space talking about it. And that's one thing that I'm so excited about what this event's done, which is it's brought young people together in a way that we can speak about it. There's been very, very few events like this that have had young people actually talking about solar radiation management and other technologies like this. And some of the ones that have done in the past, like the thing I showed you on the last slide, have often just used the young people sort of as tokens and not really giving them a lot of time to speak. Here's another illustration of it. If we talk about intergenerational justice, on one screenshot, I've found 5 different articles written by other people about intergenerational justice, using those key terms in Google Scholar. That's probably more or nearly as many as news articles in total quote young people with regards to this topic. We are being spoken for not being allowed to speak for ourselves. There's not enough young people speaking for young people. And that's one thing I'm really hoping to change. And it's really important that we change. In all the other areas of climate change, this is a court case. I think this is the Juliana court case. Young people are leading, are spearheading, are getting listened to, are having their perspective shared, are leaders in the solar radiation management space. You know, there's so few of us. I've been in this space for 3 years, and I've met barely anyone who is younger than me or even my age who's really engaging in the solar radiation management space. It's getting a bit lonely, and you know, the youth deserve to be heard. I've spoken in both the first panel with those amazing activists, far better than I ever could be, speaking about the issues, and in the second panel as well, speaking about the intergenerational justice side. Some of the scientists did in their discussions. The youth need to lead. Let the youth be heard, as it says here. And that's really, really important. Whether for or against research, young people's voices need to be heard. But I'm not just going to blame the adults for not letting the young people be heard, because there needs to be young people in this space wanting to get our voice heard, wanting to get involved as well. So both a plea to the older generations to be, you know, letting young people be heard, encouraging young people to be heard, and a plea to young people to get involved, get your message out there on what's on these climate interventions, on solar radiation management. Get yourself heard, because whether you're, you know, I don't mind which viewpoint you're presenting, the youth perspective is so important. It's so much more diverse than, you know, one speaker from the global north could ever say, so much more diverse than just quoting me in a news article could ever be. And so we need many, many, many more young people involved in this space. We've got some early indications of what young people's views are. In general, they're actually quite positive towards solar radiation management research, and possibly even slightly more positive than I am with regards to deployment. So a recent study by Pew Research Center said 55% of Gen Zers, that's, you know, my generation, young people, said solar radiation management would make a difference in reducing the effects of climate change. That's opposed to 29% of boomers. So sort of what we often refer to as the older generation. At the same time, only 4% of people in this study said they knew a lot about SRM. So it's clear, as well as getting our voices heard as young people, we also need to be educating more people. We need to be educating ourselves. We need to be learning, because we can't be having these discussions unless we do all of that. Something else which I'm going to show you on the next slide and then talk about a bit more detail later on is young people from more affected countries. So particularly young people from the global south tend to be more supportive of SRM research than people from the global north, which is why it's important that it's not just, you know, people like me from the global north who are standing in the presentation, but like this event has done, it's given us, you know, speakers from Qatar, from North Macedonia, from Honduras so far, as well as me from the UK. So it's important we get this diversity of voices as well. So yeah, this is this survey done of undergraduates in the Asia Pacific region, both global north and global south countries, and we're going to come back to that slightly later. So that's my section. I've explained briefly who I am. Now explain briefly why I think young people really need to get involved. Now I'm going to explain, I think, the perspective I spent most long learning about and trying to get listened to. And this is a key reason, because this perspective isn't listened, why we need young people involved, because this perspective, the idea of intergenerational justice, isn't spoken about as much as it should be in the space, isn't spoken about as much as it should be among researchers, amongst policymakers, amongst NGOs, among anyone. And that's partially because young people haven't been there to be able to say it. And why is it a failure of intergenerational justice not to research? Because research will prepare us. If we research solar radiation management, I'm not saying we deploy it, I'm not saying we don't deploy it, but if we carry out the research, we will be prepared for making the right choices. Those right choices could be to say we need to deploy these climate altering technologies, which in theory could save millions of lives by reducing climate impacts, you know, helping crops not be so affected, reducing the impacts of extreme weather, extreme droughts, extreme precipitation, which some research has shown. So it might be really, you know, really important decision to be making. Or we might decide deployment is too dangerous, you know, it's too unpredictable. There's actually negative effects we don't realize, or it doesn't work. But if we've not done the research, we can't make that decision. So we are very likely to make a bad decision, to make the wrong decision, because we don't have the research at our fingertips when we have to make those decisions as to whether to deploy or not, whether to do it. We might decide not to deploy because it's too dangerous, when actually if we'd done research, we could have come up with a safe way that could have saved millions of lives. Or we could decide to deploy without researching it properly, have made a major mistake in that, and then leading to the deaths of millions of people. Knowing and researching now will save millions of people in my generation in the future. I've seen a number of older commentators, particularly older white males from the global north, saying that we shouldn't research this. That leaves our generation without the ability to make the right choice. That, and I'll discuss this more on the next slide, potentially dooms our generation to a hellish world, in the words of one of these commentators. Research is necessary because it will allow us to make the right decisions. A few other points related to intergenerational justice. Solar radiation management is not a plan B. It's not a solution to the climate crisis at all. It's more like a painkiller, a band-aid solution. It's there to address the symptoms of the climate crisis, you know, of the CO2 going into the atmosphere. So the extreme weather might be able to reduce some of that. The impact on droughts, on famines, on crop growth, extreme heats. It can reduce some of that stuff. That doesn't take away from the fact we need to reduce emissions now. Doing solar radiation management is no excuse to reduce emissions, because that's the only way that we solve this crisis. It's not a replacement. It's not a replacement in any way. It doesn't even help to buy us time. We need to reduce emissions now as quickly as possible. And someone had suggested in the chat, actually, they'd asked, does geoengineering address deep-rooted power imbalances? No, because it's not a solution. It is something that it is a temporary risk reduction and suffering reduction technique that could save millions of lives. The thing that needs to address those imbalances is adaptation, is cutting emissions, and is the societal changes we need. Solar radiation management is not that. It's something completely different, but it still could save millions of lives. And I'm not willing for us not to research and doom people in my generation to die because we didn't want to make the tough decision and research now. I want to use a quote now from one of these prominent critics, a guy called Ray Pierre Humbert, a professor of physics at Oxford. He said, if we don't reduce emissions as soon as possible, then the only alternative is a completely hellish world, is a completely hellish world that I don't think any of us would want to live in, or any of us would want our dependents to live in. And that's what not researching SRM can help us do, because it does. You know, it says that we either reduce emissions directly now, which, as we've seen, you know, people aren't doing, we need to do, and we need to carry on pushing for that, but people aren't doing. But researching SRM might be able to make that world slightly less hellish, either by us not adding to how bad it is by doing SRM, or by being able to do SRM to help make reduce people's suffering. It's uncomfortable to talk about this, sure, but I'm not willing to risk my future because we don't want to talk about what happens, you know, if some of the worse climate scenarios are happening. What happens if we're reaching tipping points? What happens if we don't reduce emissions to zero in 10 years? We need to, but SRM might be able to just help us make those things slightly less bad, make that future slightly less hellish. And I'm not willing to risk my future on someone wanting to go all or nothing. I've not got long left of this presentation now. It's important to remember SRM could reduce a huge amount of death and suffering. You know, it doesn't address the root cause because it's not a solution. We still need to reduce emissions, but it could. And could is doing a lot of work there because it might not. So that's why we need to research, not deploy necessarily immediately. But it could reduce a huge amount of death and suffering. And that's why we need to research it. Or if we do it badly, it could potentially cause it. Hence why we need to research it. Just a quick few points on global justice. I'm not necessarily the most qualified person to talk about this, but I'll give you a brief overview. There's been some studies, particularly recently, suggesting solar radiation management might be one of the most effective ways, important ways to protect crops, irrespective of when we reduce our emissions, because we already know it's too late for us to completely avoid the climate crisis. We're in it already. It's not too late for us to avoid it getting catastrophic, but it is already catastrophic to some people. And SRM may be one of the best ways to protect crops. It may not be, hence why we need more research. Multiple studies have suggested that solar radiation management, if done well, could reduce climate impacts. Those studies use the same models that is used to make all the climate predictions and things like that. The exact same models. Some studies have suggested if we do SRM badly, you could cause a lot of issues. Hence why we need to research. So to know, well, can we do it well? so that we do reduce these climate impacts and we do save these lives? Or is it always going to be bad, in which case we need to make sure we never actually carry it out? There's governance issues, who gets to decide, who gets their voices heard, which is why it's really important that we include people from across the world. We include young people in this discussion. What I really want to, nail home, that we include people from the global south and from the global north, that we include indigenous groups in this, that we include old people and we include young people, and that we make, because this is going to affect everyone if this happens, or it does, or we choose not to, and the research does as well. So we need to be discussing that. I've already discussed intergenerational justice on a global scale in my previous slide, and I'll discuss that slightly on the other side. There's some amazing organizations out there really trying to get more people involved. The Decimals Fund, run by the SRMGI, which you can see here in the picture, contributes to helping people from the helping researchers from the global south carry out research into SRM, so we can build research capabilities across the world, because it's really important that we have the input scientifically and governance wise from across the world. And the last one of the last things I'm going to talk about really is these young people and young people's views. As you can see here, anything in the red is you see what it is, but generally young people across the world are quite supportive of researching SRM, and in particular from the worst affected countries and from countries in the global south. And in all countries surveyed here, these young people, these were undergraduates in this study, supported field tests and supports research and in most countries over 50% supported SRM as an option, and this was predominantly also from the countries that would be hit worse by the climate crisis. So remember, this is an issue of climate justice and global justice, as well as an issue of intergenerational justice, and failing to research SRM is fundamentally letting down a lot of people in the global south as well, and so we can't ignore their perspectives as well. Failing to research SRM fails our generation, and it fails millions of people across the world by potentially condemning millions of people to die and suffer. Our future, this isn't just something for the distant future, our future is affected by the decisions we make today, particularly with regards to research of SRM. We've already been burdened with a terrible climate by older generations, and now they're also not going to give us the tools to potentially reduce some of that suffering. We need to demand that we do get research, whether the research ends up leading to us wanting to do SRM or not. So young people need to be part of making those decisions. There needs to be young people involved, and we need to be allowed to be part of making those decisions. One final word of warning for anyone wanting to get involved in this. There can be a lot of unpleasantness, particularly from older people, often people high up in the climate community, particularly on social media. I've had a lot of people be quite rude to me, also in person as well. So there can be a lot of unpleasantness. People just saying anyone that researches on SRM is committing a crime against the world and a crime against life. Things like that. A lot of ad hominem attacks as well. But there's also a lot of pleasant and very, very kind people in this space. And that's one thing I've really found. There's amazing support. There's brilliant opportunities. I was 17 and I was allowed to write a paper. I'm writing another paper and I'm 18. And this is your chance to change the world. It's truly an important area for young people to get into. And every single young person who gets involved is making a difference, because you're already increasing by a good percentage the number of young people actually talking about this. So get involved and talk about circulation management. And the final note on how to get involved, one thing is we are, and the link to this will hopefully be going in the chat now, open letter supporting circulation management, signed by a number of different young people from across the world, from quite high profile signatories as well. The YOUNGO Technology Mechanism signed it, representatives from Worldwood, from Fridays for Future Digital, from the Kenya Environment Network, from Push Sweden, from Climate Exchange, and other young people from countries as diverse as Sweden to Timor-Leste to Kenya to the UK. So if you want to sign this letter, the link should be in the chat, about intergenerational justice and SRM research. So I'm going to talk about really some of the things that I've just spoken about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gideon, for that tremendous presentation that really has set the tone for us for our intergenerational discussion, as we will go into that now. I won't say anything more. I think this should be something that is tackled by our speakers, including Josh, yourself, and you, Gideon. Joining both of you is Marcos Regis da Silva. He's from Ecuador and he's the executive director at the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. But he's previously held prominent roles in international biodiversity governance as well, including with the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity. And we also have our very own Executive Director of SilverLining, Kelly Wanzer. She is the co-founder and senior advisor to the University of Washington's Marine Cloud Brightening project as well. So thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to get stuck into some of the things that we've talked about so far today, including Gideon in your presentation there. And one thing to kick things off, really, I wanted to kind of speak to the fact that, Gideon, you said that this is something that's important for all youth, and especially those in the global south. But I mean, Josh, you're from Ghana, like where there's probably much less information access to things like climate intervention. So considering these points, what are your thoughts or concerns or whatever for youth who do not have the access to sufficient information on climate intervention research and policy?
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks a lot to Gideon for the brilliant presentation, for the work that YOUNGO as a constituency is doing to accommodate the role of technology, and the TechMech Working Group doing tremendous work on this. When I think around young people and the work that we are all doing, well, particularly in the context of Global South and access to information, the concern is that, you cannot solve a problem if you don't understand the problem. For me, that is the very fundamental thing. To be able to come up with solutions, we need to have a very good understanding of the problem. And understanding the problem also means that you need to develop different pathways to solutions. So to young people, I think for me, the fear is that we might end up either being trapped by a one-way narrative on how things work, depending on what curriculums you are using in school, what access to information we have. We might have just one narrative on how things are done. And then if that happens, it becomes the responsibility of constituencies and NGOs and initiatives like YOUNGO and like SilverLining to bring the other perspectives into light. But that becomes a bigger problem even, because if I look at climate change, for instance, and I look at the work I do, I realize that most advocacy that young people do at a global level have always and majority been on mitigation. Reducing CO2, reducing CO2, reducing CO2. This is needed, this is important. But if I look at the lives of a bunch of people from Global South who are part of this advocacy, what they really need is also the advocacy around adaptation and loss and damage. But this doesn't happen. And then I did a research to understand why does this not happen? And it comes down to the point of access to information and understanding the bigger picture of climate change and the need for multiple solutions to tackle this. So this has to be dealt with, and it's a common responsibility. But for me, the biggest one is really targeting policymakers to make sure that as part of our education for young people, we get enough information about climate change and solutions to climate change, and not really just dumping or telling us about the old-fashioned problem, which we all know, and giving us a hopes for something that is in the future, which we're never sure if you're going to get it, but really making it present. These are the problem, understand it fully, and these are the solutions, and updating that information as much as possible, so that at every point in time, no matter where you are, you know that given your local context, this is what you need, and you're not doing advocacy or implementing projects because someone somewhere has set the donation for those kind of projects. So terminologies that come up like nature-based solution, ecosystem-based adaptation, these are all things that have been practiced in many communities for years, but they still come up from a scientific perspective. They become a global jargon, everyone jumps onto it. And it's great and it's beautiful, and we have to do these things. But I believe that if people really had access to much information, some of these terminologies will not gain the momentum they gain, because it will be very obvious that they have been practicing it and they have other needs, but these needs have not been highlighted enough in the global media or advocacy. So we need to work on increasing access to information. And as much as I like to put the responsibility on young people to spread knowledge, and we are good at this, it's really the responsibility of policymakers and educational institutions to make this possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. I mean, I think, Marcos, you could possibly respond to that. I mean, you're involved with governments, with your work at the Institute on that kind of front, on the policy making front, like they're asking those questions. Do you have any response or thoughts in response to Josh?
It's interesting, Madeline, because I think we could spend the entire day discussing this, because it's a very complex issue. I think what Josh and Gideon, in many ways, were asking is how can young people have an influence in the policy-making context? In other words, how can you influence policy-making to take into account your concerns? Now, I work for governments, and I've worked for governments all my life in many different multilateral environments and treaties. And the thing that always struck me is the fragmentation of governance. For example, there's no one governance instrument whether it's the Climate Change Convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the World Meteorological Organization, and so on, that can take into account the issues related to solar radiation management. And the questions that come to the floor in this fragmented environment: what's the liability? What's the redress? And when we speak of young people entering that environment, is what's the door? What's the entry point to those discussions? Which instrument do you discuss? And within this fragmented environment, most of them are not even part of the United Nations. They may be administered by the United Nations, but they have their own governance instruments. Climate change makes its own decisions. It's not the General Assembly of the United Nations that does. So, and then to compound the complexity is that most young people would probably go through trying to enter that space through organizations. And those organizations would be non-governmental organizations. But the role of non-governmental organizations in that space is very, very prescribed. Usually, they don't, as Gideon said, they don't have much of a voice. They have very little opportunities to make their views known. And a number of countries have strong concerns and suspicions of non-governmental organizations, particularly their role in the governance context in making policy. Because the traditional model is scientists get together, they make recommendations to the IPCC, it goes to the scientific body of a governance, they discuss it and make recommendations to something called a Conference of the Parties, which is all the governments together, and that's changed into public policy. Now, young people should enter that space at every step of the way. But the difficulty is, how do you do it formally, right? Some countries are suspicious of non-governmental organizations. Some people look with disdain at opinions outside of the government context. And also there's the global south, global north divide, which in my opinion is not, how can I say, as united as it should be. There's quite a bit of suspicion and quite a bit of resentment. You only need to look at the COVID vaccine, where most of the developed world has hoarded the vaccines. So to make a long answer even longer, my view is that young people should use the communication channels that they have, which is far different than they had before. And 30, even 20 years ago, they can make a much greater impact. They can go at the local level for their policymaker, the representative in Congress, the representative in government. They can go through stronger organizations that may have youth representation. And there's a number of decisions taken by instruments such as the Sustainable Development Goals that explicitly call on the role of youth in the decision making. And they can try to make their governments accountable to those governments that have approved those decisions. Now, it's a complex, time-consuming way, but I see no other way than that.
Thank you, Marcos. I mean, Gideon, do you have any thoughts on Marcos's propositions there, the channels for youth involvement in this subject?
Yeah, I think, and something I said in my presentation, but I think it's important, again, to sort of discuss the number of young people that are involved to even be able to get involved in this. Let's just look at things that young people don't need to be involved in NGOs for. Of course, there's still issues and big obstacles to getting involved. Let's look at, discussing on social media. There is practically no young people really on social media discussing these topics. Look at something like the Twitter space, look at something like the Instagram space, practically no one. This open letter, when it's published, will be the first open letter written by young people and signed by young activists published on this matter. Again, not done via one specific NGO, but just a group of young people wanting to come together and do this. The young people attend, young people events. This is an amazing event, fantastic event run with young people turning up. But if you look at the events that aren't specifically aimed at young people, is there many young people there? No, not at all. So one thing we need to do, and this comes back to education, but also just comes back to, it doesn't even need to be many, it just needs to be a few to create a diverse voice initiative. Because bear in mind, we don't need all young people working on climate change to focus on SRM. In fact, if anything, that's pretty bad, if everyone was focusing on SRM, because mitigation is still the priority. But we do need some, a few young people, a few organizations, working on this, coming up with ideas, coming up with policies regards to it, writing these open letters, doing, publishing news articles. There's still not been a single opinion piece written by a young person published on solar radiation management. They're all written by mostly older people. I think the youngest person who's published an opinion piece is something like 25, 26 on this. So yeah, basically, and there's no designated young youth organization at the moment. This sort of thing is in the work that is working specifically on SRM. So it's amazing that there will potentially be these channels for young people, although how open they will be, as Michael said, is a bit of an issue, but we need young people to be filling them. So we need, I urge young people, whatever your perspective on it, get involved, start learning about it. You can always email me about this. I'm really excited to talk to more young people about it. Obviously, sign the open letter, which I'm going to put in the chat pretty much again right now, just in case people lost it, in favor of research. Start discussing.
Thank you, Gideon. So yeah, guys, it's in the chat there if you want to have a look. Kelly, I wanted to ask you then, Gideon talked a lot about this being an intergenerational justice issue, and it is an intergenerational justice issue. So, but there's a problem that there's not enough young people involved. So what can the older generation do to help get more young people involved and extend the hand of partnership to young people on this subject, and basically fill those gaps that are sorely needing filled?
Well, firstly, I want to say, and part of the purpose of a dialogue like this is to start building those bridges where older people can hear the wisdom, the clarity, and the life experience of the younger people on this topic. In some respects, and I've said this to some of you involved with the event, the dialogue that younger people are having is more realistic at times around climate change. And so raising your voices and your perspective and your ability to speak clearly about what your concerns are, I think is crucial. And so part of what we try to do in SilverLining, both with young people and people from the Global South, is to try to create rooms where you can engage with the top policymakers and experts in the field. And today at this event, Barrett is a vice chair of the IPCC, and she's also responsible for the leading US research effort in government. And so trying to bring those people to listen to you is what I'm trying to encourage the adult leadership and senior academics and things to bring people into the room. And so I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is to try to give access to information and expertise to young people so that you've got direct information about what these things really are, what we really mean by research. There are efforts to oppose research where what scientists like Sarah and others want to do is really part of research that already happens every day in terms of environmental protection and going out into the world and understanding the way different things interact at small scales, so you can model their behavior at large scales and you can help people understand where the risks are. And so we want young people to have, not the sort of sensational understanding of what's going on, but have real access to the direct information about what these things are, then decide for themselves and then weigh in.
Certainly. Thank you, Kelly. I mean, Gideon, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think young people need, I pretty much think, pretty much agree. I think young people need to be getting more involved, as I've been saying already, forming different opinions in different ways, reading stuff, learning stuff is really important. And obviously also, as Kelly said, our conversation, and actually it's something I want to sort of talk about a bit more about as well as our conversation potentially being a bit more, genuine than some of the other conversation, which I think there's been a lot of clash of personalities and, ad hominem attacks going on in the conversation by older people. But we've also got a tremendous opportunity to address a lot of the inequalities as well. This is an event, as you saw, completely global. There's probably never been an SRM event that's been this global, or at least been very, very few. And the first major youth event is already got global diversity. We've got the potential here to redress some of that balance. There's a lot of focus from on both sides, both from those researching, although a lot of people researching are trying, as I showed earlier with SRMGI, to get people from across the world involved, and those criticizing are often people from very climate, not vulnerable countries. A lot of the criticism to the ScopeX trial came from Sweden. Obviously, that was where it's happening, but it's also a non-climate vulnerable country. While those in the global south didn't get much of their voice put in. So in the youth, if we can create a community of young people talking about this, we can redress some of those balances, get people from those climate vulnerable countries being able to talk about this more, being heard more, being listened to more, which I think is a tremendous opportunity. Because as we saw, I think to some extent, research is being, being quite, a lot of people, particularly from the Noble North, are quite somewhat negative of research. While those, as we saw from the speakers earlier, but also from those studies I showed you, those from more climate vulnerable countries are generally, according to the surveys anyway, more in favor of research, as are young people, as we saw from the surveys. So if we get young people and people from climate vulnerable countries more in, then we can balance out and make the discussion more equitable, more just in those, essentially more equitable and more just, and redress some of those issues that's come about because of how the space is. Also, just something I'd again reiterate to you, the space of people that are discussing SRM is really, really, really small. There's like very, very few people talking about this. So few, pretty much, I couldn't think of an area of climate change where there's less people actively talking about this. So any one person who gets involved, who starts learning and discussing and sharing and developing their ideas, getting their voices heard, that will make a massive impact. So also sort of do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gideon. I mean, just to wrap this up, Marcos, Kelly, does this make you feel hopeful?
I think this makes me feel very hopeful, and I'm really appreciating the voices and how they've come through today, because our experience in interacting with young people and young climate professionals from different parts of the world has been so powerful. And bringing that across to more people is, I think, extremely valuable. I have to say that from the first session today and the experiences that people shared about what's happening in their part of the world and what they're concerned about in the near term, those are things that we're not often hearing in the adult side of the equation. And that clarity and that expression of concern, expression of their own realities. And it's really hopeful to have those voices come through and be part of things. And our hope is that we can bring this across further into the dynamics around, we have a limited amount of time to keep people safe. And we have a reality that these people brought forward, that the parts of the world that they live in are projected not to be habitable. And that's not okay. And young people are willing to say it. And so that's very hopeful, because we're going to have to look at this problem with clear eyes on all fronts. And we need that sort of fresh energy to remind us what's really important and what's really at stake.
I'll follow up with what Kelly said. And I think the value, to paraphrase her words, is really having our participation in this event and having people like Kelly and Barrett listen to what you're saying. I think in many ways, to me, this was much more important than us giving you advice or us giving us our point of view, because I frankly have more questions now than I've ever had before. Should I invite a youth representative to our scientific committees, for example? Should I have a presentation of youth during our conference of the parties where governments are located? Should we have a formal association with a youth group in our organization? I mean, all of these questions now are bubbling up. So in that view, I think this has been a very useful meeting, and I am optimistic about it, which is very rare in my world, you know. But I would continue with these efforts. I would continue in bringing in the experts to listen to you. And I think this is making a very important crack in the door they may let you in.
Yes, right. It's good to finally hear some optimism for the day. And yeah, with that, that brings us to the end of the discussion. Thank you so much, Gideon, Marcos, Kelly. It's been really cool getting this dialogue on the go. And I guess it seems, you know, this is an intergenerational justice issue, but what it needs is also intergenerational cooperation, and for us to work together to be able to make those spaces for youth, both for youth themselves, but also within research and policy that the older generations tend to be more involved in more generally. So yeah, thank you guys so much for that. So yeah, just a reminder for anyone on the chat, we will be having our final Q&A for the day just now, a reflection Q&A. So please stick them in. Our panelists will be happy to answer those. Also, I just wanted to know, I mean, you are straddling both the kind of youth space and the more adult space. So you kind of, you understand the options that are there and the differences between those. How do you feel about you know, Julius's propositions, these safe spaces for youth? Do we need more? What needs to be done between the generations, and what is your point of view, basically, as someone who is going from the youth space to the adult space in that respect?
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you for all the intervention and panelists before me. It's really a very interesting discussion. You said, like, I'm in the stage like the interface between both, like from in the interface between climate scientists and society, but also like the transition between being youth and also working with adults. To be honest, there wasn't like limits or barriers when working in both groups, because while working as with young groups, we are from the beginning advocating for youth empowerment, for more training, capacity building, and making decision. Now it's somehow the same. So as we are working with the gender groups or within the UNFCCC process, so we are still working to promote young women or women in general, and especially young women, to build their capacity to be participate more effectively in the process, and to have this space to present diversity and to ensure inclusion. So there isn't really like barriers. But of course, when you are young, so you have priorities to learn more, to get information, and with the knowledge and work experience, so you are moving to more influence the policy process itself, and also you have to put your experience in the profit of young people who are just starting this experience. So working with YOUNGO or women gender constituency in the SilverLining process, it's somehow the same, but you try to move things in one direction. So to ensure young people, women, so vulnerable groups, that voices can be heard, and they are influencing this policy process.
Thank you so much, Julius. For sure, like we need to definitely move on from this, the more kind of like inspirational, aspirational narrative into the actual doing and making those concrete changes and making that concrete effort. But over to Alpha, I wanted to know, so you mentioned especially vulnerable groups being especially impacted by these like climate intervention research, and not necessarily impacted, but definitely more vulnerable to potential impacts if we were to make any misinformed decisions. So how do you think we can minimize those impacts, I suppose, and have like more vulnerable groups like women in especially poorer countries just mitigate those issues and bring them better into the conversation as well?
Thank you, Maddie. I would like to point out before digging deeper in and answering your question that the climate intervention should not be refused for developed countries to skip their effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they need to take action, and as pointed in the 2018 IPCC report, so climate intervention or geoengineering should be as a possible last resort and not a first option. But if we have to discuss this issue, so we have to take into consideration many issues like gender justice, because we as gender group, for example, we are advocating for gender mainstreaming in the technology level dealing with the climate solution. So technologies are not gender neutral, and climate change demands that everyone's experience and skills are utilized. Therefore, climate technology actions need to ensure that women and men are both engaged in the decision-making process, development and use of technology, and benefits from their outcomes. So under the convention, the development and transfer of environmentally sound technology represents an opportunity to increase effort and gender mainstreaming with regard to technology access and information and training on the use of appropriate technologies. So from this gender and feminist perspective, when discussing technology, we should ask whether this technology are enhancing dominance, inequalities, injustice or not. So from feminist point of view, many ecofeminists have raised the concern over geoengineering hypermasculinity approach toward addressing the climate crisis. For example, there is the Indian activist Vandana Shiva described it in an interview like wrong, because geoengineering is ultimate expression of patriarchy, and we are fighting patriarchy from a feminist point of view. Also, geoengineering from always feminist perspective, they are encouraged exclusions as it validates priority of the Western enlightened man. It makes him taking responsibility of future decision making while downplaying expertise from diverse voices within humanity. So this is under representative of young people, vulnerable like women. So it's affect somehow the geoengineering scientific atmosphere, and it's the current lack of diversity within the field of geoengineering paints a grim picture of the future of inequalities, as mentioned in the book Common and Preston 2013 research. At this point, it's important to highlight the need for dialogue and to bring new perspective in this discussion. For example, the African Academy of Scientists organized workshops to discuss and exchange about governance of research in solar geoengineering from African perspective. Already, like Gideon, when he talked about the governance aspect of solar radiation management. So among many recommendations about the content and the technical issue, they recommend in order to ensure diversity, inclusion, and to reduce dominance, they recommend that participation of indigenous African people should be considered. There should be transparency of those involved in the research and development of solar radiation management, including the research objectives and sources of funding. They highlight also there is need for research in Africa that is relevant for Africa or not, for example. power relationships, gender and cultural aspects should be included. So this kind of African country perspective, how it will affect them, how they can benefit them, if it's enhancing the technology and innovative techniques gap or not. So we should take into consideration all this aspect while discussing geoengineering.
Thank you all thank you so much for that response, and glad to hear that this organization has been able to talk about these kinds of things and been able to engage in that conversation. That is what matters first and foremost. And like you said, to have those respectful dialogues, to have that inclusion, to have that diversity in the debate, because that's what we need ultimately at the end of the day, so we can make these decisions as we move forward. But guys, that is the end of our reflection Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us, Julius and Alpha. It's been a real pleasure. And that also brings us to the end of session 3. So now we will be moving on to session 4, which is the development of the call to action. We have some instructions for you, because we will be switching Zoom links for that. So if you did not, but first of all, sorry, if you did not sign up for the workshop in session 4, then this is actually the end of the summit for you. But those who did sign up for it, we will be switching over. And switching over to a new meeting. So in the next few minutes, you will receive an email with a new link, the same email that you found the link for this event on, and click on that, and that will bring you to the meeting for session 4, which will begin in approximately 10 minutes. So please check your spam folder just in case it has gone in there. So yes, you will be receiving a new link. However, if you did not sign up to the workshop, but you would like to join us, please go to this website here in the green, silverlining.ngo/safe climate workshop waitlist. If someone could pop that in the chat as well, that would be fantastic. And we will try and pop you into a breakout group from there if you sign up on there. But yes, thank you so much for being with us until now. This has been a fantastic summit so far, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. It's been a real pleasure to have you with us today. We've had, it's been a long one, but it's been really cool to have all these different views and opinions and perspectives come together for the first ever youth summit on climate intervention. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in 10 minutes for session 4, and hopefully not, we'll see you again soon. But if you are joining us, please do remember to check your email for that new Zoom link. Okay, cheers. Thanks, everyone.